by the former Work and Pensions Secretary, Iain Duncan Smith, who campaigned to leave the EU. Welcome back to the Daily Politics. Your Conservative colleague, Robert Halfon MP, was right, wasn't he? When he said voters will go bananas about the size of the Brexit bill. Can you justify it to voters? Well,
justify it. I mean, the reality is we have to just put this into perspective. The main point here is that it's not whatever they agree, and I don't want to pay a penny more than we have a legal bind to, and that's exactly it. So I'd love to look at what they've agreed at the end of the day and decide whether or not it has a legal purpose to it. But notwithstanding that, in the course of the negotiations, they come up with a figure. This figure is money spread over 40 years. At the same time, if we had not left the EU over 40 years, the net effect of that would have been a contribution of ours of 400 billion. So if you net that out, we are still better off by 360 billion, which allows us to spend that 360 billion on things like health and all the other issues.
So it's a bargain?
Well, at the end of the day, leaving the EU is a bargain, and £360 billion is actually the net positive effect of leaving the EU to the UK as and when this happens. It isn't money that we're suddenly plucking out of the budget to go and spend. It's coming out at the same time as money is coming back in. Right.
When are we going to start seeing the money, the Brexit dividend, that money coming back that was promised during the campaign?
When we leave.
No, you've just said we're going to be paying in for the next 40 years.
No, we're also getting money back. Let me do this clear. I don't know why this is so difficult to understand. First of all...
It's not difficult to understand.
Hold on a second. Every year we put net a staggering amount of money. So let's say, for example, the figure is £10 billion we contribute to the EU budget net. Let's go with the net figure. So over 40 years, that becomes 400 billion that we've actually put into the EU budget. In the same period, we will be contributing money back. That means net we get money back.
Right, but we're not going to start, as you said, we're not going to start getting money back for at least 4 to 5 years.
No, we're not going to get money back.
So not when we leave in March 2019.
When we leave and we no longer contribute, that is when we get the money back.
Right, but your bus didn't say, the famous campaign bus, let's fund the NHS instead, but only after a transition period and a €50 billion divorce bill has been paid.
I'm not in favour of a transition period. I'm in favour of getting out tomorrow. But the reality is that what they finally agree as a settlement, the date that we leave is the date we no longer make contributions to the EU budget.
Right. But the government's caved in, basically, hasn't it? I mean, you talked about what we owe legally in your first answer, or the legal purpose, but the House of Lords Committee says we don't, as a matter of law, owe anything at all. So you've caved in.
I haven't caved in. I want to see exactly what they've agreed and why they've agreed it.
No, but we already know. House of Lords Committee says we don't owe anything as a matter of law.
The government thinks that they do.
Right.
And therefore there may be legal obligations with regards to pensions and various other things. I don't know. All I'm saying is, let's get this in perspective.
Right.
Whatever the final agreement, whether it's... Remember, 20 billion of that, by the way, is over this implementation period. If there was no implementation period, that bill would only be about 20 billion. So let's be very clear about this. The reality is that what they agree beyond the implementation period is about legalities.
Is your support for paying what we owe, or however you want to describe it, still conditional?
Conditional in what regard?
Well, is it conditional on the trade terms that we get?
Completely, but it's not my support. It's the government's position.
Well, I'm asking about your support.
I know, but my government, our government, has made it very clear that unless they get a free trade arrangement, then this money is irrelevant because the money is off the table, and that's the key point.
Right, so you're paying for access.
Get a free trade,
you are paying for access to trade.
No, because there's no deal.
Right.
The point is, the deal is that the EU wants to know what our commitment is in the future, and we are arguing, quite rightly, as the EU has accepted, that nothing is agreed till everything is agreed.
Right, but Iain Duncan Smith,
to use your no agreement, we would go to WTO and we would not accept any binding requirement to pay money to the EU.
You've told us it's absolutely hinged on a free trade arrangement.
Which is the original discussion under Article 50.
But that's paying for access. You're prepared...
It's not paying for access,
you're prepared to say...
50.
Well, hang on, let me just finish the question. You're prepared to pay up to £44 billion for access to trade, single market.
I'm not prepared to pay anything for access. What I'm saying is the two elements are part of Article 50. Article 50 says all these elements have to be agreed at the same time.
So what are we paying for? I don't understand what we're paying for. If you say it's not about...
Hang on, we're not paying for something. What the government is negotiating is whether or not we have a legal obligation to, with commitments we have made to make payments over a period of time, such as things like obligations to British citizens who happen to work for the EU, who get a pension requirement.
But you said we only pay it if we get a trade deal.
Because we don't know. If we get a deal, the whole point
That is a trade deal.
No, it's not. Trade deal is part of the whole arrangement. If we don't get an arrangement and an agreement, we leave under WTO. There is no agreement to pay any money to the EU. That is what this is all about.
If that is
Article
the case,
50 is quite clear about that.
I think most people say when you say it's hinged on a deal, trade being a very important part of that deal, which to some people will feel like paying for access, which is essentially a tariff. Wouldn't it just be better just to pay the tariff and trade with the EU on WTO terms?
I'd be very happy to go to WTO terms completely. But the reality is that their agreement under Article 50, we have to agree all of these things if the EU wants to do it. If they don't want to do it, then we will go to WTO. There won't be an interim phase, there won't be an implementation phase, and we would leave, as the head of the WTO said the other day.
So why don't you just do that now and save us all that money?
I'm not the government. I'm simply saying what the government's position is right now. I have said all along that going to the WTO, as the head of the WTO said the other day, it's not a nightmare or a problem. It's wholly reasonable to do it that way. I simply say that the government wants to get a free trade arrangement. If that free trade arrangement is a decent, operable one that gives us very good access on financial services, then on balance it may be a good thing to do, in which case we're prepared to accept it, providing we don't go into horse trading.
How does it look to you in terms of support from people like Iain Duncan Smith for the government? Does it look to you as if this is buying or paying for access, or an eagerness just to get to the Brexit date, and they'll pay however much?
I think the government has got itself in a pickle because it keeps talking about legal obligations and doing what we owe and all that sort of thing. What is going on here is a political arrangement. Up until 2020, they have a budget which is predicated on us staying in. They want our money. If we want a transition period, which the government has now decided that we do, because frankly we're not ready to leave at this point, there would be chaos at the border, and most ministers acknowledge that. They're buying time and they're buying goodwill. And you can dress it up as legal niceties and all the rest of this deal making as much as you want, but at the end of the day they want our money, and we're prepared to grease the wheels a bit in order to get what we want at the end of the day.
But you have to separate these two out, Tim. I'm going to take you to task on this one. There are two elements to this, and you've elided the two together. Yes, it's absolutely right that in the implementation period, the UK government has agreed to pay what it would normally pay were it still a member. Separate that out, because that may well go down as the basis that says we're happy to take you to 2020 because that was an obligation. What comes next has to have a legal base to it. And that is to say, the remaining monies over the 40 years, these monies have to have a legal foundation, otherwise we cannot possibly pay them.
Things like pensions, that is the case.
Exactly my point. So the two are quite different.
That is true.
One is an agreement to pay, which we didn't have a binding requirement.
But the basic issue is that they need our money, and we are finding ways to provide it to them. And you could, some of that is the pensions money, which has a legal basis, and some of it is frankly goodwill money.
Right, and also paying into some organisations and institutions.
Well, where we remain a member of certain things, like the universities programme or the science programme, then we will just pay a simple entry fee for that.
Right, all right. Well, let's have a look at what else you might agree to during transition or implementation period. Are you prepared to see continued overseeing by the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, for example, for those 2 years and beyond?
No.
Not during transition at all?
Not at all. When we leave, and the key element of leaving is leaving the ambit of the Court of Justice. To me and to most people, it is the Court of Justice which defines being a member of the European Union. And there is no way, by the way, this would set a historical precedent that would have to take you back to the time when the British were in China to ever have a moment when a foreign court ruled over the courts of another country.
Right. What would you do at that point if the government says we are going to continue some sort of jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice?
I'm fundamentally opposed to it.
Right.
And I'm not alone in that. Many people are opposed to it.
Right.
By the way, I'm not alone because the Prime Minister is opposed to it too. Because in her Lancaster House speech, I think she said quite clearly that one of our red lines is no longer being under the authority of the European Court of Justice.
Just finally on Donald Trump, what do you think the government should do in terms of that invite to Donald Trump?
Well, I think we're inviting the head of the United States, the President of the United States. It, of course, has to go ahead. We made the invitation where he's the representative of the whole of the United States with regards to his tweets. And the truth is he tweets on everything at the moment. And I know there's a storm about it, and the organisation that he tweets is an outrageous and appalling organisation. But I wouldn't centre too much on that. I would simply centre on the fact, when it comes to the visit, we're inviting the head of state of a #1 ally of ours and of whom we do the greatest level of trade beyond the European Union.
So the British government just has to put up with it, really?
No, they've made their complaints about it, and I think it's quite right for us to say it's quite unacceptable for him to insinuate, in a sense, that the UK doesn't do enough about Islamic terrorism. That is a matter that should be done behind closed doors and in discussion with the Americans. But, I mean, there is a serious criticism about Europe generally having a very poor record, the Belgians and others, on Islamic terrorism and extremism. But this is not the way to make it.
Iain Duncan Smith, thank you. Now, take